In this lesson, we're going to add grass to our terrain. Alright, so in between lessons, I went ahead and I scattered these rocks throughout the map. I've basically just laid them out in a very basic fashion. It's not completely detailed, but we don't want to oversaturate this with lots of different rocks and things like that. We don't want to take away from the sand and things like that. So, as you can see, I have this rocks object here, and it contains all of my rocks, and this is actually a prefab that I created. You can find it in the prefabs folder called rocks. Now, if you want to learn how to create that prefab, it's very easy. What you'll do is you'll right-click and create an empty game object in your hierarchy, and then with that game object, you'll want to rename it, and so we'll call this rocks, and I'll just call it copy for now because I'm going to delete it here in just a minute. With that new game object, it's empty, so there's nothing in it, and then you want to reset the position to 0, 0, and 0. Doing so will make it very easy to place the prefab in the proper position that you see here. And so to reset that position, I'll click on the cog and hit reset position, or you can just type in 0, 0, and 0. Then what you'll do is you'll take all of your rock objects that you have selected and drag those on top of this object here. Okay? And then once you've done that, you'll simply take your rocks game object, and it should have everything parented inside of that, just like you see here. And then you'll drag that into your prefabs folder, and it will create a prefab. All right? And then all you'll have to do from there is drag that into your scene and then reset its position to 0, 0, and 0. Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and grab our texture, or excuse me, our terrain, and we're going to go over to the details button here. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to paint details like grass and even rocks. So we can define what grass texture we're going to use, and then we can also define what mesh we want to use whenever we're painting this in. So to get started, let's come right down here to our details, and let's click on Edit Details. You have the ability to add a grass texture, or you have the ability to add a detailed mesh. A grass texture obviously is going to give you a grass foliage. The detail mesh, you can input any 3D mesh that you would like, and like I said, you can use it for rocks to scatter throughout your level if you want to paint those in that way. Perfectly fine. Let's go ahead and add grass texture, and you'll see up here we have our detail texture. Let's left click on this little button here, but as you scroll through you may not be able to see any grass objects. Now if you're following along without using the project files and you're following along exactly as I'm doing, you're not going to see any of those grass textures because we need to import that package. And Unity has a package that we can use for grass. So to import a package, you'll simply right click on your assets folder and you're going to import package, and then from the list you're going to choose what package you want to import. In this case we're going to use environment. Now I know that that's off screen, but it is environment. Go ahead and left click on that, and it's going to start decompressing that package, and then it's going to show you all of the contents of that package. So as we go through here, I'm going to turn off editor. I don't need that. I don't need the cross-platform, so I'm going to collapse that as well. I'm going to take the speed tree objects here, and we're going to go all the way down. I'll let you use these as you want to. And we're going to go all the way down. Let's see, LOD. We have the palm tree. Everything looks good so far. Here are our terrain assets. If anything, this is what you'll need if you don't want that speed tree stuff there. So we're going to keep the terrain assets. I don't need the water. I don't need the water basic, and I don't need the water for the pro features. The utility, I don't need that either. And I think everything else is fine. So just take what you need, and then I'm going to hit import. That's going to create a new folder inside of here, and it's going to be called standard assets, and then it's going to have a folder inside of that called environment, and then you're going to have all of those files that we just selected. So let's give it just a moment to finish that up. Alright, so now that that is finished, you'll see this new folder here. So let's go ahead and select our terrain again, and make sure that you are on the details section. Let's go to edit details, add grass texture, and then let's try this one more time. Click on the little circle here, and then we're going to scroll down, and we are going to look for this grass frond, okay, because this appears to be more of like a weed, and that's something that you'll see in kind of a desert plain there. So let's go ahead and click on that. It's going to use that. You can adjust some of the properties here, like the minimum width and the maximum width, even the height on that. And then we have like noise spread. So we can adjust that if we want it to kind of spread out and be a little bit more random. But I think I'm going to leave it just the way it is. We're going to leave the dry color and the healthy color alone. And then it's going to create billboards for every texture. Okay, and a billboard is basically just a plane that it uses. All right, so let's go ahead and add that, and you'll see that it drops right down here, and it's much like painting the texture of our terrain. We can add multiple grass textures here if we want, so if we want to mix those, we can. We could even add a detail mesh here, and if we wanted to add rocks among that mix whenever we're painting, we could come in here and we could use one of these rock prefabs, maybe the smaller rocks, and then we could paint that in if we wanted to. You could even paint in trees in this, but obviously there's not going to be any trees in the desert, and so we're just going to have some grass. Let me go ahead and close that down there. Now, like I said, it works just like painting in the textures, so you have your brush size and your opacity. I usually take the opacity down pretty low, just so that way I can kind of spot click this grass in here, especially like with the desert, and then my target strength is pretty low as well. Now you could also modify this by going to the settings, because here you have tree and detail objects. You can set up their detail distance, so they draw at a distance of 80 meters away. We have detail density, so if you want to drop that down a little bit, you can do so. The tree distance is pretty much the same thing as the detail distance, except for just trees, obviously. Yeah, and then we have some wind settings, and we'll see these in action here in just a moment. So let's go ahead and start painting this in. Let's go back to our terrain, and let's go back to our paint, and let's select, or not paint, excuse me, the details. Let's select this brush, and I'm going to make my brush size pretty big just to get started here. And I'm just going to left click in a couple of spots and just kind of paint that in. Now you'll notice that this is very, very green, and this is based off of those colors that we had. So if you want to edit this, you can always click on the edit details button and then hit edit here, and then you can change the color of this. So if we want to draw that down a little bit, we can kind of change how healthy it looks. Okay, if you want to make it even a little bit more like a brown color, you can do that. Okay, and then the same thing here. That's going to kind of change the base of that overall, so we'll kind of get something that looks a little bit more dead. Now there, grass will have kind of a green tint to it in the desert. It's going to be a little bit more brown. So we'll hit apply on that, and then you also have the ability to change it right here as well. So we have this grass tint, and you can really start to change its overall appearance. So it's going to have like this light greenish color, so we want to make it look kind of pretty dead on that. Now you're going to notice that there are some of these billboards that get stuck on the side like this. You can erase these by going back to your paint or your details object, and if you hold down shift, you can paint that out. You can also hold down control, and that will get rid of those as well. Okay, so now the control is a little bit more controlled, I should say, that for a lack of a better word. If we use shift and we try to erase, it's going to erase everything that paintbrush touches. That's including if you have multiple details here inside of your palette. Now control will only delete what you have selected. Okay, and so if you just want to get rid of the grass, you'll want to select it and then hold control, and you can erase that. Alright, so just left click to paint that in, and I'm just going to spread some of these out. I'm not going to go real far, and I'm not going to try to make it clumpy or anything like that. Now, as you start to click in some of these areas, remember your draw distance is on, so if you back way up, you won't be able to see some of that. So just be careful whenever you're making this. So I'm going to come in, I'm just going to spread some of this out. I may hold down Control, just kind of come in and paint some of that out to kind of thin it out a little bit more. And like I said, always look at what you're doing from a game point of view. So as you're playing your game and you're testing it out, just kind of go through some of this area and kind of see how that grass looks. Does it add anything to it? Is it just kind of getting in the way? Does it not look right? All of those are good things to think about whenever you're painting in details like this. And so this is a great way of adding in foliage, or grass I should say. You could add trees, and it's the same thing. It's this button here, and it's the same type of process. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and just kind of paint a few patches in here and there. And I'm not going to get too wild with all of this. We might get a few patches of grass that kind of go on the pathway. I want to try to get rid of those as much as possible. Okay, and think about areas that are not going to be seen. You don't want to paint those in, because again, these are billboards, and they are going to take up draw calls. Okay, and ultimately that's going to take up memory, I should say. All right, so a few here and there. Try not to get too caught up in making the foliage, and you can play around with this all you like. If you want to come in and you want to kind of thin it out, hold down Control to do that. Okay, and because we only have one detail, just hold down Shift as well. That will work too. Okay. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the way that looks right now. You really can't, go out too far to see that. If you take that draw distance way up, you'll be able to see it from further away, but that can create some issues. Okay, especially at the runtime of your game. All right, so there we go. We've got our plant there. It's looking pretty good. I'd probably want to change the color of that just a little bit more. I want to try to modify that, give it a little bit more of a yellowish brown tint to that. And then, like I said, you could always go back to your actual object and then edit that. Okay, try to change that up a little bit more, maybe make that a little bit more yellow. So now we're starting to get kind of this brownish color. And maybe add a little bit more orange to that. There we go. Let me take this a little bit more toward green, because I do want a hint of green in that. All right, that feels a lot better. Now notice something really quickly too, is that some of that looks more green than other parts. Okay, so what's controlling that? Well, it's taking from the texture itself, and it's trying to determine what is dry and what is fertile. Okay, and so I want to make sure that I kind of desaturate that a little bit more. So just kind of creating a mixture of these, and what it's trying to do is blend those colors together, and so we get something that doesn't look completely uniform, and I think that that's good. Alright, so now that we've learned how to add foliage to our scene, let's go ahead and move on into our next lesson.